Thank you. I'd like to welcome all of our guests. Is there any translation needs? Okay. At this time, I will accept an approval of the agenda.
I'll motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Agenda motion approves 5-0. Now we will move on to our recognition portion of the night.
Yeah, we, typically we make an effort to recognize our students and our staff for the excellent work that they do every day in our schools. And it's always nice to hear from our principals and our directors when they call those folks out. But it's nice to let the community know and to let all of you know that January is School Board Appreciation Month. And today is an unusual day in the sense that it's our new governor's transition. So he hasn't put out I don't think school board recognition was the first thing on his agenda, but I'm sure that it's coming. But we wanted to take a few moments to recognize all of you for your effort. And there's a certificate for you that I want to pass down. And absent the governor's proclamation, maybe we could just personalize it a little bit. And I would just share a word of appreciation about each of you, if that's okay with the board.
Sure.
All right. Well, I'll start with Azaro. And one of the things I've come to know about Director Pruneda is certainly his love for our community and for our students. And he always has a keen eye looking out for our teachers. How is this going to impact our teachers? And I know that having students and a spouse in our system, he brings a passion to the work. And I've always appreciated that I know with Director Pruneda, I'm always going to know where he stands. And I've always appreciated that about him. So I appreciate his work in the last year on the board. President Prowse, who I think has been on the board since our COVID experience and has certainly gone the rounds around some unusual circumstances in school board. And what I appreciate about Director Prowse is the steadiness to take this new leadership opportunity and to help guide the board into the next iteration of the Othello School District, behind the strategic plan, thinking about new considerations perhaps for facilities and things that are coming our way, and again, keeping a keen eye out for the best moves for our teachers and for our kids. So thank you to Director Prowse for that. Ken, who I see on Zoom, certainly as the veteran of the group and has been on board for quite some time. And when I meet with Ken individually, when he was board president and he would come in and meet with me, what I always knew the meeting was going to be brief for me and for him, and it was never going to be emotional. Ken is a very steady presence. He's very calming and keeps me grounded when things get tough, and shares messages in a way that I think are neutral and to provide calm for the team. And I think that's a really good component of our team. And so I really have appreciated Ken's steady leadership. Director Baginski, I know that he graduated in 1991 because he's said it almost every meeting. And I graduated with him just 1 year earlier. And what I have appreciated about Chris's presence on the board is not only being mindful of the opportunities and experiences we're creating for our kids, but he's particularly mindful of the makeup of our community, the ag-based sort of economy, and the kinds of folks that live and work in the Othello School District. And I've always appreciated Chris looking back toward tradition, but also pushing us to pursue new experiences for our kids and staff. And I think that's a difficult balance to maintain and that all people don't have. And so I've appreciated that about him. Director Gerber, who I got to spend some time with this weekend at the legislative conference, and we're going to share that a little bit with you. I've known Director Gerber since he was a student. I didn't know he was, maybe he wasn't like this as a student, but a guy takes more notes than perhaps any board member that I've been around. And what I appreciate about that, and I've shared this with our principals over and over, this board that we currently have doesn't forget things. When we say we're going to do something, they expect us to get it done. And one of those reasons is, one, Aaron has a great memory, but he also takes great notes. And so I appreciate his attention to detail and the level of accountability it provides for me and for the staff who know that when we say something to this board, that we're giving them our word and they're going to hold us to that. So I want to recognize all of you for all of your work. If your families were here, I'd recognize them because I know it's difficult to show up to the meetings and to take time away from your family. Now, for our student board members, we're not recognizing you today. We'll do that at a different time. But I don't know, Miles, if you wanted to add anything to the conversation, maybe put you on the spot about your experience as a student rep with board members.
Yeah, sure. All the board members, especially when we had our leadership conference trip. So yeah, I think I had a great experience with each and every one of you guys. I enjoy, again, I like Aaron Gerber's thoughtfulness and wittiness too. Got some good jokes on him all the time. Director Berginski, I enjoy. I also like to focus on the ag kind of system, and I see it a lot in our schools. Especially in the high school, we see a lot of people who are moving towards the CTE route. So I see that, his efforts they're good for us. They're good for the kids. Lindsay, love talking to you old time. She's just a great personality to be around, honestly.
Thank you.
I think you guys have made it a very interesting time. Always fun, always something to do, never a dull moment.
Well, again, I do want to close by sharing with the community and with our staff our deep appreciation for signing up for a position that doesn't come with certainly a lot of compensation. It comes with a lot of phone calls, a lot of folks who want to bend your ear about particular issues, and I appreciate you taking that on in the interest of serving our kids. So thank you, and happy School Board Recognition Month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a nice surprise.
Yeah.
Oh, round of applause. Thank you. Appreciate everyone showing up tonight when you're not required to be here. That's very nice, so thank you. Thank you, Superintendent Perez, for all of the nice words you said about us. We are going to move into our student representative reports, and we would like to welcome our two new student reps. We've got Isabel Sanchez and Liliana Faustino. Did I say that correct? Yes. Okay, great. And of course, always our shining star, Miles. So yeah, we'll turn the time over to you guys.
Okay, high school's been pretty dry, I'd say. We're kind of just in the big bout of sports, so everyone's kind of out and about right now. One thing that is a concern, though, is a lot of people are starting to hear about our DOHS transition. Not necessarily scared, but they're just looking more at the logistical side. Classroom sizes, teachers, how's it going to look because of the different program. Like they don't do the same kind of classes that we do. It's the work is different. So I think people are just looking for types of clarity. I'm assuming, looking at this right now, that we'll talk something about that with this levy stuff here. And ultimately, too, I just wanted to introduce our two new people. Isabel, I have her in AVID, FBLA, leadership, cheer. She's everywhere with me, and I think she's going to be a great fit for this position. Same with Liliana. These guys are both scholars, too. They do their work all the time on top of doing all their other extracurriculars. Liliana is a great voice, and she's good connecting with her Running Start students as well. I think this is going to be a good section of kids. Obviously, we do miss Sebastian and Katie, but I'm excited to see what we do with us three.
Great. Do you girls want to add anything?
I'm just very excited to have this opportunity to be a student board rep, because it was something in my New Year's resolution to be like, just accept opportunities, to not say no. So I felt like this was a great opportunity to be a voice and to speak my mind and speak up for other people. I'm very grateful for this chance.
Great.
I would say the same thing. This is definitely an opportunity I've been looking forward to. It's something very new to me. I'm not very used to leadership stuff, but I feel like this is a great way for me to show what I have and show others that I'm able to take on a leadership role.
Well, thank you. We're so excited to have both of our new student reps on the board, so thank you for being here.
Director Prowse, if I could address Miles for just one moment and the other students. I know that when we're staying away from the word transition about DOHS, and a lot of us in the system are having trouble with that because we know it is a transition, and we're talking about it as an integration. How do we bring those students and those teachers over to OHS in a way that feels good for everyone? At the next board meeting on the 27th, we'll have a report that we're going to provide about that work. We've been working pretty closely with Principal Tovar and his team, Principal Atchison, and we have an outside consultant, Dr. Chuck Salina from Gonzaga University, who's gone through this process in the Sunnyside School District several years ago. And so he's really pushing on us to think about how we're doing it so that we do it in the best interest of everyone. So I hope you bring your questions next time on the 27th and listen to that presentation, and then, challenge us to make sure that we do it right by the students who are at DOHS and the kids that are currently at OHS. And so we'll provide that update in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to board member discussions. Do we have a legislative report, Director Gerber?
Yes, just briefly. So the 105-day legislative session started today. New governor, new attorney general, all sorts of positions are new now. So we get into that. Like Pete said, we attended a legislative conference over the weekend, and we're going to talk a lot more about that in the superintendent informational items.
Great. We have a preschool site visit coming up on Tuesday, January 21st. I let Director Baginski know that I would not be here, so he's going to run that meeting at the preschool. And is there anything else anyone would like to discuss? No? Okay, we will move on to required approvals. I will accept a motion to approve required approvals.
I'll motion to approve the required approvals.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Just really quick, do I need to say any opposed?
Yeah, it's always good to provide clarity for the community and those watching if they're not able to see, or that audio really provides a record for our minutes as well. So
Okay.
Yep.
Just making sure. Moving on to required approvals, early accounts payable warrants 2.
I'll
Do I
make
have
a
a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve early accounts payable warrants 2.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And I will abstain. Moving on to number 3, required approvals, early accounts payable warrants 3.
I'll make a motion to approve early accounts payable warrants 3.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'll sustain from that.
Okay. Motion passes. And now we will move on to our superintendent informational items.
yeah, 2 items this evening. One on levy logistics that Amy Suarez and I are going to talk through a little bit, and I'll give you some background on why we're doing that. What might seem like a little bit early. And Director Gerber and I wanted to have a conversation with the board about what we learned at the legislative conference, and so I think he's going to jump into some of the components. You have a few resources in front of you about what the entities, WASDA, who represents school district directors, WASA, who represents school administrators, and WASBO, who represents school business officers, have come together around these 3 big ideas, and they're calling them the Big 3. And so, Director Gerber, if you want to jump right in, and then I'll tag along as needed.
Yeah, so we had this conference over the weekend. Like you said, it was co-sponsored between the 3 organizations. And they talked a lot about how this is kind of the first time that all 3 organizations have come together and aligned themselves on these priorities to have a better chance at actually making progress with the legislator. So that's really exciting for everyone. Like Dr. Perez said, we heard the Big 3. They said that a lot. They said that over and over at this conference because that's what they're trying to get across. Now, you do have handouts, one for each of the Big 3. So the Big 3 that they're focusing on with legislators this time around, the first one is MSOC funding. So that's material supplies and operating costs. The second is special education funding. And the third is transportation funding. Now, they went out of their way to explain to everyone why they chose these 3 things. The first big point they made about this was that these are all things that are supposed to be covered by the government, that are what's in the Constitution, that they're supposed to fully fund these things, and that schools feel like they're not funding them. So that's part of why they chose these 3. They also chose these 3 because they felt like these things would benefit every school district in the state, instead of choosing 1 or 2 things that only benefits half the districts, or some people don't have this problem, some people don't have that problem. They chose 3 broad things that everyone will benefit from. And even if you don't have like a big problem with one of these 3 in your district, that extra money for those things will allow you to move money around and use it elsewhere. So those are 2 of the biggest reasons they focused on these 3, that they feel that the government isn't doing their job in covering them, and that these 3 things would positively affect every school district in the states. So I just wanted to draw your attention to the 3 handouts. We'll talk about MSOC first. That's kind of the one that I think affects our district the most directly. Now everyone's already familiar with what MSOC means, but this first group of the green bullet points talks about everything that MSOC funds. Insurance and utilities are kind of the big ones that everyone knows about and is talked about the most often, but there are quite a few other things that are covered through MSOC: technology funds, curriculum and textbooks, any supplies, library materials, instructional or professional development for staff, facilities maintenance, security, and central office supports. And of course, MSOC has been an issue for a while now, and they did approve some funding for that last year, but kind of like it says here, didn't the legislature add funding for MSOC last year? Yes, however, the increase provided was $21 per student, whereas actual expenses are underfunded by nearly $500 per student. So they were kind of worried that legislators would be like, oh, I thought we already took care of this, but they only did, a drop in the bucket on that. And so that's why it's a major focus for us again this year. Did you have anything you want to add to MSOC?
No, that was an excellent summary. MSOC, I think a couple important points to reemphasize that Director Gerber shared. MSOC is the one that's going to impact us the most. It's the one that we can calculate and say, yeah, that's really going to make a difference for our operations. For us locally, we've had particular increases in insurance and utilities that have been, especially around insurance, that has been rather dramatic. But just like you're experiencing in your business or personal life, certainly the cost of everything has gone up. They made a point, and this is maybe more common for those of you who work in private industry. These used to be called non-employee related costs, NERCs, but they went away from that term. So this really isn't about additional salaries or compensation for staff. It really is about, can we keep the doors open and can we provide the services we have been providing when inflation has dramatically impacted a number of items.
Any questions or comments on the MSOC portion of this?
What's the long-term, do they have a long-term goal on how they're going to get more funding, or are they waiting for the federal funding to come through and then comes through to us?
I think if you ask them their position, they would say, there's enough money, you're just spending it on other things, and your first duty in the state of Washington is to pay for public education, and you're not meeting that duty. So what all these other projects you have going on that cost money, they're pulling away from the money that public ed deserves. So their strategy is really to say, spend at the level you were spending. So when you look at it as a percentage of overall budget, there's about a 10% drop in how much revenue's been pushed out to schools. So even though the actual number might have gone up, right, they're investing this many more billion, as a percentage of overall revenue, it's less. So they're just saying, do what the Constitution says, which is it's your paramount duty, pay for public schools, and then these other projects you have going, you might have to give some of those up. That's their strategy. So they're really doing making an effort to calculate those costs specifically and asking school districts to help tell that story. Because another thing we heard pretty clearly over and over was, how do we begin to advocate with our representatives so that they know, here's the issue in Othello. When we talk to Joe Schmick, we shouldn't be talking about transportation. We're probably only going to talk about MSOC. That way, when he goes over there and votes, he knows how we feel about it.
They made a big push to get everyone on the same page about the big three, so that the legislators weren't getting distracted with other education things that, while important, aren't going to make as big of a difference for as many people. So with, like Pete said, MSOC is the one that's going to impact us the most. They did also talk a lot about both transportation and special education. And as I said before, when we get more money for those things, there's more money to move around, so that still impacts us. In special education, they talked a lot about what's called a multiplier. So the state funds us according to how many students we have. But if there are a special education student, then they get a multiplier. So instead of getting 100% of what a general education student gets, they get like 1.12% of what they get. So it's extra funding for us. And something that they're putting a big emphasis on is recalculating those multipliers, saying that those multipliers don't actually give enough money for what it takes in these special education classes and for that funding. So that's their big thing with special education funding, is to raise those multipliers so that more schools are getting more funds per special education student. and then that will make a big difference for those schools. Anything to add on that one?
I think one local experience for those of you on the board who have heard us talk about co-teaching and wondering how are we adding co-teachers when we're talking about reductions in other areas. This is one of the ways you can do that. When additional funding comes in specifically for special education students, the more that you can include them in general education courses, the higher the funding. So if a kid is in, so I'm speaking to the student reps now, if you're taking an algebra class and there's a student who has some special struggles in math, and we put some of them in that algebra class, that class size might be a little bit smaller, and you might have 2 teachers in there to make sure that the special education students have a general education experience. To provide for those 2 teachers, the state gives us some extra money.
What's the criteria of a special education student?
Yeah, so in the state of Washington, you would either qualify for an IEP, an individualized education plan, or a 504. So there's a series of assessments that students go through to determine whether or not they qualify for special education. And that's a really good question, Miles, because one of the concerns about people around this legislation is, hey, we get extra money if kids qualify. Let's qualify a bunch more kids. I don't believe educators they don't get into the business to do that, but it will help them provide opportunities for students that maybe otherwise we couldn't. So the multiplier thing is a big factor that I know Amy Suarez and her team and Heidi Wagner calculate to help us think about how do we maximize our resources. The other thing that Aaron and I heard about, and we reached out to Amy over the weekend about something called safety net funding. So in special education, if you have a particular student with really high needs that comes at a dramatic expense, once you cross a certain threshold, I believe the number we heard was $40,000 in additional expense, that you could qualify for these safety net funds that are available across the state. There's only a certain pot that's available, and we just haven't qualified in the past. But that was a new learning for me and for Director Gerber and talking about that. There are also safety net funds in transportation that we haven't been able to access, but it's important for a lot of school districts in Washington.
Any questions or comments on the special education funding portion of this? The next one is transportation. Similarly to how in the special education funding it was changing the formula, they're kind of trying to do that with transportation as well. There's a formula for determining how much transportation funding a district requires, and it has to do with number of students. And something they haven't taken into account is, a bus that carries 20 students versus 40 students costs the same for the district in fuel and maintenance and everything. So it's called the Student Transportation Allocation Reporting System, which they call the STARS formula. They're trying to kind of revamp that and make it better reflective of what the actual cost is. We heard some crazy stuff about transportation expenses around the state. We were talking to someone from Federal Way, was it?
Yes.
Said that they're having to send multiple Ubers out every day to pick up students like way outside their district, and it's just costing them insane amounts of money. Yeah, so we felt a little better about that one for our district. But as with all of these, when we get more money for funding from the state of these, then that does help us. So.
Yeah, and I think the comment about the big 3 and that they're going to impact all school districts, this was one that Aaron and I sat back and said, well, that really isn't that important to us. But in our small group, the story that was shared, if you look at the 3 first screen bullet points there, particularly around homeless students under the Federal McKinney-Vento Act. So if you live in a dense urban area and you start school in Federal Way, and then, in the first trimester, you move to Tacoma, but you're homeless, the school district is obligated to pick you up in Tacoma and bring you to Federal Way. They're required to do that. And so what happens is it's hard to find bus drivers all across the state of Washington, but particularly in urban areas. So they don't have bus drivers, but they're required by law to do this. So they're looking at rideshare services like Uber. They're looking at other sort of public transportation, which creates its own other problems because you have this bus that's dedicated to get people to and from work, and you fill it up with 100 students going to high school. It sort of changes the vibe on the bus. So in understanding the big 3 and their level of importance in each district, for some, this was a top issue. And as it relates to safety net, the state currently doesn't send you any extra funding until you hit that threshold. So $40,000 for Uber rides, that's a lot of Uber rides. You're probably never going to get there. And it's not across the district that you spend an extra 40,000. It's for each individual student. So definitely some formula problems there that we learned about that the state needs to figure out. And all three entities, like Director Gerber shared, are pushing on these three items, on these three key funding issues. So it started today. The session started today, and they'll be sending out updates. And Director Gerber was up shaking hands with people that are going to be communicating that out to board members across the district, or across the state. I know you'll be hearing more about these things.
Given the tone from WASDA, which was basically there's no money, so don't come looking for it, was this conference, did it have a little bit of a different tune? Or like, do you think there's a probability that these could that we could actually get some funding?
So the probability is much higher now that the three groups are kind of together on this, rather than each group asking for their own separate thing and not getting anywhere with someone. So they just talked about like how many lobbyists all three groups together have. We had they were senators, right? We had 2 senators come and speak to us at the conference about these things. And they said, don't worry, we know about the big three. Like, it's been communicated to us. And we've heard reps say, I know about the big three. So yeah, I think they're definitely going to make some difference. It was a little bleaker at WASDA, I feel like. They were just talking about the deficit. And they definitely did here as well, but they said, because of that deficit, that's why we came together and focused on these more basic things. We're not asking for crazy things that on the outskirts, but just these basic things that the state should be covering anyway. So yeah, I think they have a better chance now at getting some of these things through than they would have.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We also got challenged at a couple of points, not the two of us, but the folks in the room who were, they challenged the presenters not to use the word deficit, because they actually said there's more revenue available. It's just things cost more, which has created a deficit. But it's not that that taxes aren't pouring in. It's just that the costs have accelerated so much. The 2 numbers that they used, one was the projected shortfall over the next 4 years was between 13 and 17 billion. So where do you find 3 or 4 billion every year in that size of budget? And then what we heard from Senator Wellman, who really is the powerhouse around public ed in Washington, she said, I think Reichdahl and Inslee have asked for just over $2 billion, 2.5 to be invested into public ed. The number she used was 1.1 billion is what she expects will be pumped into the system to help address some of these big 3 issues. So there'll be some money there. And the other thing we heard over and over was concern about making sure that as the funds come in, that there are guardrails around them so that they can only be used for these particular activities and not bargained outside of their intended use. So, we'll see if folks can come together around it. But really, it was the first time they've done the conference this way, where they had presentations and folks who are working in Olympia, and also opportunities for us to go in small breakout rooms. So they were 60-minute sessions with about 350 of us there. There were student reps as well. So maybe next year when we go, we'll be able to take some student reps with us. And we heard from the student reps at the end, and I think they asked a really nice question to kind of bring all this together. They had 14 student reps, and they asked them several questions, and the last one was, hey, what are you missing out on in your schooling experience because funding's short or things have been cut? And so to hear individual stories from kids who said, I can't get to the skills center anymore because they canceled the bus. My sister went to school here, and they offered French, English, Spanish, and German, and American Sign Language. I either have to take Spanish or sign language. Like they're really specific stories that kids are experiencing in our schools because we've had to cut back in certain areas. So at the end, they really brought it around and circled back to the students. It was time well spent, I think.
With the shortfall of 13 and 17 billion, what is that? Like, we're losing that, or was that what we're not making back?
It's the state saying, hey, for the last couple of years, this is how much it's cost to run the state of Washington, and this is how much revenue came in, right? So you're supposed to balance the budget. 100 billion comes in, 100 billion goes out. Well, they know that costs have escalated, and so now they say, well, we need 105 billion this year, but we know only 104 billion, 100 billion's coming in, so we're 4 to 5 short, right? So is that a deficit, or do you just need to cut back and not do some of the things you've been doing? That's what they're wrestling with. Yep. And in Washington, what's different at the state level than at the national level, what we heard was it has to be a balanced budget. They can't just walk away. The numbers have to line up. So some things are going to go. I think they shared Governor Ferguson, who's the first new governor in 12 years. He's walking in on day one, and they're saying to him, "Hey, congratulations, Governor. What would you like to cut?" And or what taxes would you like to raise? And nobody wants to be that governor. So it'll be an interesting 105 days to see where they go.
So I would just encourage you to read through these. They're great handouts, just very succinct, one-page things about kind of their goals, and they're good for sharing with other people and for getting legislators' attention. So, yeah.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you, Director Gerber, for that, and for the board for your thoughtful questions. We're going to move on to the next portion, and you have a PowerPoint in front of you, a presentation. Says board workshop levy, but what prompted this conversation is we have our friends in Moses Lake and in Ephrata who are running levies, and I think the voting date is February 12th, maybe? It's coming up. And so those are big moments for both those school districts, but particular for our friends and colleagues in Moses Lake. And so we're paying attention to the efforts that they're putting into communicating what the levy does. And for you, those of you who are new to the board, there are really some specific requirements about how much you can advocate for levies in your role as board members and in these kinds of meetings. We're a year out from really jumping into that work. But we thought it was important and it was timely, as you're hearing maybe from friends and family who live in Moses Lake and in Ephrata or other school districts around us, how levies work and what it's really all about and what the impact is here in Othello. So Amy put together a series of slides, and she and I maybe are going to partner on this. I think she's certainly going to take the lead, and we hope you have some questions about how levies work in Othello and what you all need to think about, because your role will be, when do we run a levy? How long do we run the levy, for how many years, and how much do we ask for? Those are really the responsibilities that the board takes on.
I don't think it's on.
Sorry.
There it is.
Okay, so what we're going to discuss today is, why do we have levies? What are the levy limits? What is an EP&O levy? It's for educational programs and operations. We're going to go into our levy history, what the levy pays for, and then what the tax rates are. We're also going to have a levy planning calendar. Like Pete said, we're not going to go for a levy until next February, but we're trying to get the ball rolling now. I'll give you guys some information. So why do we need a levy? So the state gives us a certain amount of money, for example, for a teacher, and then the average teacher pay is a certain amount. Well, there's a gap in there. That's what a levy covers. The levy covers a gap. The funding we get plus the levy is what we have to balance every year. So we need our levies.
Let me share this with the student reps because it ties to the conversation we just had. The state of Washington sends us this much money. We need this much to run schools in Othello. So we ask our local taxpayers, your moms and dads, your aunts and uncles, your neighbors, we say, hey, we need a little bit of extra money to run our schools, and then we only vote here in our community. And if enough people vote yes, 50% plus one, then we get some extra funding from the community. And Amy will talk a little bit about if we throw some more money. So remember when I said the state sends us this much and we kick in this much? If we kick in that piece, the state will send us even a little bit more. They'll say, hey, thanks for doing that. That's called levy equalization, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes.
With the money coming from our communities, is that a higher tax, or do we donate?
It's a tax, yep. Okay. And so we'll talk about those rates and kind of where they've been historically in Othello.
And then if I'm not mistaken, the bonds and levies are different.
Correct.
The bond is?
Bonds are for buildings, levies are for learning.
Okay, there you go. Bonds are building, levies.
And Miles, if you were to ask your mom, hey, can I see the tax statement for our house? On that tax statement, you will see how much actually goes to the schools.
Oh, okay.
It'll show bond, and then it'll show the levy amount. Mm-hmm.
One other important difference about bonds and levies, Amy's exactly right. In Washington, to pass a levy, what did I say it takes? How much? 50% plus one, right? You just got to get over the simple majority. For passing a bond, it's 60%. So there'll be some communities where the levy will pass. Hey, we just know we have a levy so we can keep our schools open. And then you have to ask a little bit more for a bond, and so the threshold is a little bit higher. There is legislation floating around to bring that down a little bit. The last number we heard was to bring it down to 55% to see if that might help communities pass bonds. They have not passed at a very high level in Washington the last few years.
Okay, the next slide is some items that we pay with our levy. So some examples are certificated and classified staffing, our sub-cost for professional development for our employees, technology, preschool, curriculum, athletics and extracurricular activities, after-school programs, safety, maintenance, and insurance. And I have a couple of examples just so that you guys know. So for example, substitute cost. That's a really good one because the state gives us a whole, in 23-24, the state allocated $123,000 for substitute cost. What we actually paid from basic ed was $1.1 million. So that's why we need the levy, because we can't say, oh, the teacher didn't show up, we're not going to put a substitute in there, you know.
And when we have long-term subs, do they get the same pay as if they were a sub every single day? Or do they get bumped up to like an actual teacher pay?
After 20 days, on the 21st day, they get paid like a first-year teacher.
One other thing about the sub costs that we learned this weekend. So the state, these formulas that Director Gerber talked about, I believe the actual allocation for certificated is four days.
Yes.
Yeah. So each teacher gets 12 sick days or days they could be absent, plus some personal days, and the state only provides for 4 of those. So that gap, those 8 extra days, we have to figure that out locally.
And they don't give us anything for the classified staff, for the paras, the food service, for anything. That's all levy. Another example, since we're talking about the MSOCs, in the 23-24 school year, we got allocated $6.3 million for our MSOCs, and we spent $1.8 million more than what we were allocated. So that comes from the levy and LEA.
There is one other important item around levies, and the most significant expense in any school district is salaries. And what the state did when the McCleary legislation passed is they used to, so in Othello School District, they would take all the teachers and say, well, you're a first-year teacher, and you're a 10th-year teacher, and you're a 20th-year teacher. You need this much money, and that's what they would send to the district. Well, when they changed the funding formula, they just came up with this average. And so the average that the state allocates is $78,000. Now, if you have teachers who are brand new who are making $60,000, good for the district, right? You have some extra money that you can hang on to. If you have teachers at the far end that are making $105,000, state isn't sending you enough money. And so in Othello, the state allocation is just over $78,000, but the average expense for teacher is just over $100,000. We have to make up that gap. And what some school districts are doing in really large systems, if I'm a 20-year teacher and I apply for a job in Federal Way, and a first-year teacher applies for the same job in Federal Way, some are being forced to hire the first-year teacher because they're not as expensive. And that's what the state the model is flawed by the state. They're not compensating districts to fund their staff at levels that are sustainable.
So the levy limits, these changed in 2018 with the McCleary Act. As you can see here, we're either going to do, the limit is the lesser of $250 per thousand of the assessed value, or we're going to be able to levy $2,500 per student in our district. That $2,500 has increased every year with inflation. The 2024 rate was $3,149. So if we were to use our assessed value in our district, we would be able to levy up to $14.3 million. That's the maximum. The minimum would have been 5,759, 5,759, and that's doing 250, which is your assessed value, times the Adams County assessed value of 2.3 billion divided by 1,000. So those are the minimum and the maximum. That was our 2024 levy lid. And in one of these other slides, you'll see where we actually were.
And what we heard at the conference was there are some school districts who are pushing to have that levy lid increased. So they're saying, hey, in our community, we can do $4 per thousand, and people will vote yes. The pushback on that was, well, now you're going to create this system in Washington where you have a bunch of haves at the top and then a bunch of have-nots at the bottom. And so they're trying to get districts to stay together, but there are some communities who are saying, I'm willing to pay a little more tax. Why are you limiting me to 250? And you'll see where Othello's at in relation to that 250. And again, the responsibility of the board is to determine what's the threshold that the district needs to do business, but also that our community will vote for and approve.
Okay, so more information about levies. Generally, they're a replacement levy. So currently, our community is paying a levy. So when we go out for another levy, it's to replace that levy. It's not a new tax. It's replacing the tax that's already in there. We usually go for a levy between 1 to 4 years. The past several years, we've done 3. Years before that, we were doing 2. But in the past 3 times, I think we've been doing 3-year levies. Like Pete said, it requires a 50% plus 1 to approve it. We can only go for our election 2 times a year. So if we go in February for our election and it fails, we can go again in April or November. And if that one fails, we can't go again.
For how long?
Till the following year. So that means it would affect 2 school years. Half of one and the beginning half of the next one.
And how you'll hear school board directors or student reps who are in school districts where they had a double levy failure, that's what Amy is describing. You don't want to be in that situation. Double levy failure is very hard to recover from, and it's what has occurred in Moses Lake.
We already said it's funded by our local property taxes. Like I said, you get a tax statement every year, and it states on there, I don't really pay attention to mine, but I see it online, that it breaks it down how much we get from the state and how much we get from local school. Also, when we're getting ready to do our levy, there's a form that I have to complete, and we send it to OSPI, and they have to approve it. So there's a form on OSPI. I go in there, we complete it, and then we have to go for approval for that. Okay, and the big bullet on the very bottom, I should have done it in big letters, is we must pass a levy in order to get the local effort assistance money. If we don't pass the levy, we don't get the state funding for it. So, and we'll show you the breakdown here in a little bit.
That's that match that they give us for passing it?
So in this slide, this is the 23-24 revenues, and the reason that I put this slide in here is so that you can see that 9% of our revenues for 23-24 were from levy and the LEA. So what happens if we don't pass the levy? We don't have 9% of our revenues. 9% of $81 million budget, Miles? 7,000, 7,049,000.
Oh, that's what I just said. I was about to say that.
So this is our historical information. Goes back to 2013. You could see in 2013, the blue is the levy and the green is our bond. So in that year, in 2013, our taxpayers were paying $4.40 per thousand of their assessed value. And then you can see it's gone down, down, down. If you go into 2024, which is this past year, you can see that our rate went down to $1.23 for our levy. When we ran for the levy, we were projecting it was going to be $1.50. but because the assessed values in Adams County went way up, which was out of our control, we're down to $1.23. We are projecting, or OSPI is projecting, that our assessed values in 2025 and 2026 will be $1.05 and 99 cents.
The assessed value, what is that?
So they,
Like our county.
all the properties in Adams County, so they're gonna add the value of my house, the value of your house, the value of Chris's farms, all the properties, add them all together, and they come up with this amount of how much Adams County is worth.
And that determines money for our school?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So the way they determine that is they get that 2.3 billion, they divide that by 1,000, and and that's how they come with their rates. So in the next slide, what's in black was from a presentation we did in 2022 when we were going for our levy. I updated those numbers, they are in red, to the actual. So you can see that in 2024, well, in the first column, you'll see what our levy rates are. So the 2.8 million, the 3,050,000, and the 3.3 million, those don't change. That is the authority, that is what we're getting each year from property taxes. Okay, so then you divide that by the 1,000, and then that gives you our rate. So you can see that in 2024, we were predicting that we were gonna be $1.50, actually for all 3 years. That's why we were increasing the levy rate. But now, with the property values the way they are, it's $1.23, $1.05, and 99 cents. So because our rates went down, and they're not at the $1.50, the state does not give us the full amount of the LEA money. Okay, so they're gonna say, what's $1.23 divided by $1.50, and whatever percentage that is, the 82%, that's how much of the allocation of the LEA money that we get. So as you can see that next year we're gonna get even less LEA money, and then the year after that as well. So in the totals, you can see that when we submitted our levy proposal, we were expecting that our levy LEA was gonna be $24.8 million. Right now, we're projecting that it'll be $19.8 million for a difference of $5 million.
Quick question. So when we went to the community and asked for the levy, we told them it was going to be 150 because that's what we thought it was going to be
Yes, based on those property values at that
at
time.
the time. Okay.
And we'll go into that in the next couple of slides.
Can you go back one slide? So this slide here, if you think about the green portion, that's that would be like your mortgage, right? You're paying it on this house or property that you bought. And when does our mortgage end on that bond?
December 2027.
Yeah, so in coming up, that whole green chunk is going to go away. And when you think about levies and bonds, that's the kinds of conversation and strategic thinking that we'll need the community to help us with, and the board to say, all right, what's next? What's the next need in Othello? Because if this graph was designed in a way that really works for communities, it would just be flat. So that way you don't feel this heavy new burden, and you don't get this dramatic drop when schools need the funding, and then it goes back up. Because this is a hard story to go out and tell, going back. Right now, it's 11 years, right? How do we look back that far? But I think it's important for the board to start thinking about that bond coming off the books here in just a couple of years.
And is the bond the same way where it's an increased tax for the community?
Yeah.
The bond was, we use it to remodel all our schools back in 2008 and 2009.
And build Wahidas, didn't
And
Yes.
Yeah.
yes, the leftover, I think there was money left over.
So what actually happened with Wahidas, and Greg maybe can help with some of the historical part of this. So the costs got accelerated, right? And inflation went up this just recently. The opposite happened when it was 07, 08 and the crash. Construction costs went down dramatically. And so that was really almost extra money that was left over from the remodel. They were able to build that school. So it was just really, really good timing for the community. And when you go to a business owner, it was an easy sell. Hey, if we do this project, we're going to get a $20 million school back then, and the state's going to pay for it. So we'll have some more sessions around state match and bond preparation and all those things in the next year or two. But I think it's important for us to start thinking about that.
Okay, Amy, I need you to dumb this down for me, because every time we've done levy information, I always am like, but really I'm like, what, how? So, okay, if we passed a bond for $1.50 per $1,000, when your assessed value increases, so let's say my house was worth $100,000, and then it went up to being $110,000. Wouldn't I still pay $1.50 per $1,000?
I think the bond was set up in amortization.
The
Not
levy.
the bond. I'm talking about the levy.
Oh,
Sorry,
okay.
levy.
Okay, sorry.
So in the black it says $1.50, and then it says actual $1.23. Why are they charging less? I don't understand that. And you said it's because my assessed value went up.
Yeah, so that it doesn't take as many dollars to come up with a $2.8 million, because that $2.8 million stays the same.
Yeah, we levied a fixed rate, a fixed amount.
So
So-
the fixed
So it
amount
takes-
wasn't $1.50.
The fixed amount was 2.825.
Okay,
Yep.
that's what I'm not getting. I'm like, why would we get less? Why would I pay less than
Yeah.
$1.50 if that's what I agreed to? I didn't realize the fixed amount was the
Yeah.
end goal.
And the part where we get less is the state is now saying, hey, you agreed to pay $1.50 and you're not. You're paying what Amy just said was 82% of $1.50. So the extra match we were going to send you that Miles brought up, we're only going to send you 82% of that. And so that's where these negative numbers start to pop up.
There
So-
has to be, oh, sorry,
No, go
Lindsay.
ahead, go ahead.
There has to be a set amount when we request a levy?
Yeah, so we're thinking about those structures, and do we fix the levy rate, the cost per thousand, or do we fix the amount, and being strategic about thinking about that, right? What's the right way to do that? So when we start to talk about bonds and levies, that's absolutely something we need to address. Because then it becomes more predictable.
If we had
Right.
fixed the amount at $1.50, we wouldn't be having the shortfalls, right?
Correct.
We'd have a
Correct.
lot more money. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lindsay, for asking that. Makes it a little more clear.
Okay, so this table shows what the assessed value was for Adams County in 2022. It was 1.7 billion. When we did the tables for the levy at that time, we did them at an 8% per year growth. And then if you look in the next slide, or in a couple of slides, you'll see that it actually went up in 2023, the growth was 23%. So the increase from 2021 to 2024 was huge. And that's why it's making such a big difference in our rates.
One other thing I want to point out on this particular slide, I know that I've talked to a number of board members and community members who say, hey, look at that school in Quincy. Look what they built in Quincy, right? You guys maybe have been to that school. Do you see Quincy on that chart? Where are they at? What's their assessed value? Almost $8 billion. They have more assessed value than Moses Lake. And when you have that high of an assessed value because of the data centers that they have there, the people really paying the tax are the companies that own those data centers. And so as a local person in Quincy, you don't have to kick in as much in if you once you tax this assessed value, your rate goes way down and you're going to get a really nice school at a really good bargain because of those data centers there. So, I get that a lot from folks who say, why can't we do what they've done in Quincy? Well, that's one of the factors. Their assessed value, they're an outlier in the state and maybe in the country. Very unusual. As Quincy has fewer students than we do, and certainly probably not even a third of the students that are in Moses Lake schools.
on the same line, I was just noticing Pasco has an assessed value of 15 billion, but their community pays $1.68 for EPNO. So they're getting more revenues in that way, more than we are. One of the things that I wanted to point out is I contacted the Adams County today, and they said that the 2025 values should be in by the end of this month. What I wanted to point out in this slide was when we're trying to figure out what is the growth for Adams County, are we going to use a 20-year growth? Are we going to use a 10-year, or are we going to use the 5-year? So when we start looking at the levy, those are the kind of things that we're going to have to say, you know, do we predict Adams County growth is going to be 8% every year, or 10%, or is it going to be like 2023 and it's going to be 35%? Those are unknowns to us that affects us, because we're budgeting at 8% growth, and then it comes in at 35%, and then it brings our revenues down.
Is that growth in students or housing?
Property value,
Property value,
assessed value.
okay.
And the next slide is just goes back to 2004 of how, what the property values were.
And I think if you take out the anomaly of 2023, when perhaps there were just, maybe there were changes in assessor processes or personnel, but that's certainly a dramatic difference, and made it difficult for school districts to predict where we were going to end up.
So when I was working on the budget this year, I have to predict in the 4-year budget what we're going to get in LEA money in 25 and 26. And the way I do that is based on a tool that OSPI provides, and they have their own growth for Adams County. And until we know for sure what Adams County did, those are the tools that we use to predict what our revenues are going to be. And that's in the next slide. OSPI posts this tool. They updated it in November, and they're predicting our assessed value to be 2.9 billion with a 26.11 increase. Now I have this tool. I will follow up in the end of January to see if the values are posted, and that's going to give us a better idea what this year's going to look like, because that value will determine the LEA in 24-25 school year as well.
Okay, so the percentage that they're estimating, this 26.11% increase for 25, is that the same percentages from the slide before?
So the slide before, those are actuals.
So like in 2024, we increased our property value by 5.8%. And they're saying that in 2025, it's going to go up 26.11. So we're having another huge jump like we did in 2023.
This is, yeah, that is OSPI's tool. So then I thought, okay, I wonder if they're using the same growth. What's their rhyme and reason? And I went in and looked at other districts, and they're all different. So my assumption would be is that they have somebody who's really looking into what the growth would be.
Okay.
But we'll see. I'll keep you guys updated at the end of January. Okay, the next slide is just history of when we have gone for a levy and the pass and failed. This goes back to 1992, and we have only failed a levy once, and that was in 2000. The interesting thing is, I wasn't here, but it failed by, we only had 48.5, and if you remember, we needed 50, and then they went ahead and went in April again, and then they passed it by 75%, which is almost the highest we've ever gotten. So. Okay, so the next couple of slides is just when we're going to start planning for our February 2026 levy. I think in July or in August, when I'm done with the budget, we'll have another get-together, another budget workshop, and say, okay, we need to figure out, I need to know for our budget, what are we going to do? And we'll have another sit down and try to figure out, are we going to do the $1.50 or, so those are decisions that we're going to have to make this coming summer.
Okay.
And then by December, we have to file with the auditor. We have to do our resolution in October. And then election day, I believe it's going to be February 10th, the second Tuesday of February. Do you guys have any more questions?
No, but I know that East Valley is running a levy because when we were at their basketball game, before the game started, they did the pledge, and then somebody read like a little script in English and in Spanish saying, we're running a levy, here's the things that it pays for. Our sports program tonight wouldn't be possible without our levy money, like please community, please vote yes. And then they also had a pamphlet that they handed out that, I mean, I thought it was the, like the brochure for the game. I don't know what it's called, I can't think of it.
Program.
The program, thank you. And it was actually a brochure about their levy and all the things that it pays for. So that like stuck out in my mind of, wow, this is a district that's like ready to go, and every person they come in contact with knows that they're running a levy and what it pays for. Because I think sometimes people get confused, you know, new tax, more money, you know, you're mismanaging funds, blah, blah, blah. But it's a replacement tax that is actually really, really, really beneficial to students. So anyway, I thought that was really great, and hopefully we can follow in their footsteps and be really great with our messaging to our community about how important this is. So thank you for all of your hard work, Amy.
Yeah, that's something that we can start doing now, like with our posts, like thank you community for, like, one of the things that I had written down I didn't say is the athletics and extracurricular, what it cost in 23 to 24 was $1.6 million, and that's all levy. So.
No,
I have a sister in Moses Lake, and she has to drive she had to drive her daughter's volleyball team, you know, as many people as she could fit in her Suburban to every away game. So it's just, I mean, little things that you take for granted that, oh, the bus is going to take the girls and bring them home and all of the things. Like we got to show up for our community and really make this work.
No, I agree on the communication part of it. If we can get the word out, even some banners posted saying that I was just in Moses and that, yeah, the whole Moses just flooded with vote, and then so that people, we get the word out, we get maybe like what Lindsay saw at East Valley, things like that. I mean, when I first started voting, I didn't know, I had teacher friends that said, if it's a levy, just vote yes, it's for the teachers. So I always just voted yes, but I never knew what I was voted for. I just relied on my teacher friends to tell me to vote on it. But if we, you know, get the ball rolling and really publicize, maybe we gotta do a community forum and we have you explain it. We can explain it better to the public and answer questions or something. I think whatever we can do to get people on board, I agree, but somehow getting the message out.
Yeah, and this was really our attempt to let you know what our neighbors are dealing with, let you know what's coming your way, and to begin to backwards plan what you just described. How do we begin to communicate and share with folks? And one other important session for the board will be, what are your limitations as a board member? How can you advocate? Where can you advocate? What can you say and in what format? So we'll get some training on that as well. And, you know, hopefully historically, the community has supported levies, and we're going to make sure that they show up again for our kids and for our teachers. So thank you for your careful attention to both those presentations, and we'll turn it back over to Director Prowse.
Great. Thank you again, Amy, for all of your hard work. And thank you to Aaron and to Pete for your presentation on the things that you learned when you were on the west side and also for this levy information. We will move on to our policy review. There are some policies that are being retired and some procedures that are getting updated, so please review those before we take those to vote next meeting. Did we have any public comment?
No public comment this evening.
Okay, great. We will move on to upcoming events. January 20th, there is no school. I'll take a woo-hoo from our student reps. Just kidding. January 21st is our preschool site visit that will be led by Director Baginski. And then January 27th is another regularly scheduled board meeting. Does anyone have anything that they need to add to the upcoming events calendar?
We did all get invited to the Career Day at McFarland. I'm trying to remember
Yes.
what
We did.
day it's on.
I saw that too.
I don't remember what day it's on, but it's this month.
Yep. It was in an email. I have it right here. January 30th.
Yep.
At 8 a.m. to 10:30.
Have we got anything back from MMS with I forgot necessarily what the program was, but I know something with the parents and the students about kind of the behavioral issues and stuff. I know Mrs. Schaefer and the other counselor came and talked to us about the sessions that they run to help, I guess, mitigate those kind of problems and expulsion and all those other things. They said they're coming back, but was there a date that they set, or are we just kind of until? Yeah.
I know that the middle school hosts several parent nights. I get invitations all the time for different things, whether they're talking, trying to educate parents on social media practices and all sorts of different, they have a whole myriad of standards-based grading and a ton of things that they meet with their parents and try and educate them on different things. Okay, we will move on to board self-assessment of the meeting.
Great meeting, very informative, especially the levy. Thank you, Amy, again, for
Yep.
putting all that together. And thank you for the shout out for us board people. Shout out to the shout out. So
Yep.
When you go to conferences, you hear all sorts of horror stories from around the state, and we're seeing lots of financial stuff pop around all around the state. And one of the big reasons we're not as bad as it could have been is because of Amy and her team. So we're thankful for them.
Is Ken still on? Marty? Okay. Thankful that we've got a full board tonight. Even though we've got Ken on Zoom, we still have a full board and all of our new student reps. So thank you guys for attending tonight. Anything else? Okay, we will move on to an executive session. The board will go into recess for 60 minutes to discuss the sale or lease of land, potential litigation, and the performance of a public employee. No action will be taken following the executive session. Thank you.